and fill the paper with the message that it wants to send.
My guest today has been an award-winning author and professional journalist for over 2 decades and has served as managing editor of several newspapers around the country. Her articles have been published in the Wall Street Journal, Russian Life, Flight Journal, and World War II Quarterly, among many others, and she's been interviewed by the BBC, National Public Radio, Voice of America, and other prestigious broadcasts. For her first book, The Marines of Operation Iraqi Freedom, she drew on her experiences accompanying the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division to the Persian Gulf during Operation Desert Thunder in 1998 as the managing editor of the Georgia Guardian. In her comparative study, Flying for Her Country, the American and Soviet Women Pilots of World War II, the first study of its kind, she weaves together the threads of both the Russian Night Witches and the WASP. So you decided on the thesis, you decided what you were going to study. Then how did you go about the research? Was it all academic or did you travel to Russia for it?
I wasn't able to travel to Russia for my thesis, unfortunately. Didn't have the time or the resources for that. But actually, since I did a comparative study, I was able to find enough information to be able to do that. So for the American side, for the WASP side, I contacted Texas Women's University, which they have a wonderful archive on the WASP. And so I was able to work with them for materials. Also, just obviously I read everything I could get my hands on that's been written on the WASP. And I think for the book, I interviewed one WASP, Jean Harmon, since we were living in the Bay Area. She lived in Menlo Park. And so she was actually the only WASP that I was able to meet and interview for the book.
I was curious to understand how you went from a master's thesis to a published book. And is that normal for an historian? Do you always publish your thesis? Because it seems like you published it under 2 different presses, correct?
Right. So first it came the hardcover. Prager Security International published my first in hardcover, and then I was lucky enough a few years later, Potomac Books, my editor, actually my acquisitions editor, liked my book enough to sell it. When she moved over to Potomac Books, she had them buy the rights, and it became a paperback, which I was really grateful for, especially since they had priced my hardcover like ridiculously high. So it wasn't, not selling a lot of copies. I think it was like $50 or something, which is, I'm like, what? So the paperback was great. I was actually able to put more photos into it. And then, I think it was like under $20. So it was much easier to promote and to sell. So I was really happy about that. But yeah, it's funny, after I got my degree, and my thesis was published, I just kind of thought it was kind of more of a lark. It was like, I've done all this research and I'm proud of my research, and my thesis was really well received by my professors and the university. So I thought, why not? Why not try and get it published? And I had written, my first book, Desert Dogs, The Marines of Operation Iraqi Freedom. So I did have some publishing, credentials to my name. So that makes it a little bit easier. I think once you've published something, makes it a little easier to, kind of continue that. So yeah, so I just, I sent it to probably like half a dozen. I did some research on what publishers, do specifically history, women's history, aviation history. And yeah, within a couple months, I was able to kind of start that process, which I was really grateful for. And it was exciting. It was really, really nice to kind of be able to share my work with a wider audience, because I don't, it's a sad, theses are put in the university's library, and
yeah, mine
maybe
is sitting
10
in a
people
library
that like
somewhere.
it.
Yeah.
They probably don't get read much, right?
Right.
So that was really exciting.
You've already talked a little bit about the opportunities that you received from having written it to meet the history that you wrote about. But in what other ways has publishing this book affected your life?
Well, it's funny, I never really thought, that I would still be writing and talking to people about women in aviation. I think the book kind of became a little bit I don't know, kind of extended the life of it, being able to do these events, which I was so happy to be able to do, to moderate, WASP panel discussions. I did several of those. One with the Air Forces. They have an annual like air and space conference in Maryland that I got to do. Also, it was an exciting one in Seattle at the Air Museum in Seattle. I moderated a panel of the Soviet air women, and that was really exciting because we had to deal with a translator who's actually a friend of mine, and I'd met her in Moscow. And it was interesting because Galina Brok-Baltsova, who was featured in my book, she's one of the navigators in the dive bomber regiment, and she's a sweetheart. I just loved her, and she was so excited and had so much enthusiasm and passion for what she was talking about in her time, during the war. And she would just talk and talk and talk and talk. And Fidan, who is the translator, she would just, she'd try to catch up, but the audience would just laugh because there's like, they knew that, she couldn't capture everything, the essence of, so she tried to get as much as she could, translated into English. But it was a really great experience, and it was really wonderful that the Russian women were able to come to the United States and and share their stories with American audiences.
So I was wondering what advice you would have for either a student of history, someone who's in an academic setting who chooses to do research on an unexplored topic about featuring women in aviation, or somebody who just has an interest in some character in our history who has not been well researched before. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I think usually if you're interested in a topic, you obviously go to the library and you get like as much, it seems old fashioned going to the library, I guess, but I guess they do exist still. But obviously you probably go online. Okay, you Google first, and you'd find all the information, and then kind of start building up your resources. Obviously primary sources are the best because those are the eyewitness, the ones that are written by those people. And
speaking of which, I do want to call out the extensive bibliography at the back of your book. You have a lot of resources listed there for people if they want to go to source material or other reference material on the topic.
Oh yeah, and I love bibliographies. I'm one of those like strange people. I actually read people's bibliographies. Especially when something I'm really interested in, because I'm like, ooh, I want to check that out. Like, oh,
that's my kind of rabbit hole. People talk about the internet, like I can go down.
Yeah, it's great because it's like people can like actually go there and like just kind of start the research. So yeah, and that's another great thing. Be able to not only look at the book, but look at where the author got some of their information. And, so that's also really important. And then, if you're lucky enough to be in a subject where the people, the subject matter are still alive, and there's still some of them, then by all means try and make contact with them if you can, because that, and also just being able to get research that hasn't been written, hasn't been recorded yet. Unfortunately, with our World War II folks, so many of them have passed away, and we have very few of them left. So I kind of wish I'd done my research maybe 10 or 20 years, a little bit earlier, so I would have caught more of them, But I'm very grateful that I did when I did, because the more if I'd waited, I wouldn't have been able to actually meet them and share a lot of experiences.
In that context, I do want to say, we are losing our World War II veterans, but their families, their legacies are still here, some of them. And I know that Sarah Byrne-Rickman has been able to do some of her research that way by contacting families who had either diaries or letters.
Oh, yes. Yes, memoirs, and absolutely.
Yeah, and so that's another way to maybe get access to source material.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a good idea.
And then publishing, you kind of talked about your publishing journey already, but if you've done all this research in an academic setting, especially, like what does that look like? You've done your master's thesis. Was your press at your school, or you went to a different university?
No, and that's a really important part, because some people, there's so many publishing companies, and some people just, it's really important to do your research for that as well, because not all publishing companies publish certain subjects, right? And so it's really important. Like, I got a book called I forget what it was called, but it's basically a book about all the different publishing companies and their contact information. I don't know if they still do it, but they did it annually. And I would get it every year. And, kind of like if you're a freelance writer, here are the places that you can sell your work to. And then they have ones that are publishing companies. And so that was really nice because you had kind of all that information at your fingertips. And then in the listings, they would state whether, what kind of subject they look for. Let's say women's history or military history, and then just some information on there, like, how long does it take for them to get back to you? Like, the funny thing is, like, one of the university presses that I sent my query letter to, I think like they may have gotten back to me a year after I submitted it. Like, I had already gotten a contract, and I think my book was already, like, I was already kind of doing, going towards it and doing my research and writing and everything. And they're like, oh, well, thank you so much for your, I almost thought that, I would be kind of embarrassed to write a letter like a year after. It's almost like, did it get lost in their desk or something? Or they, like, it was just like, really? So that was kind of me. But I have learned, though, that the publishing world has its own timeline that's very separate from yours and my timeline. So they're like, it's very, very different. So you have to be patient, while also, still keeping tabs of the progress and everything. But what advice I would give is just do your research and make sure that the publishing company that you're, because you do have to take a lot of like effort to, like, the query letter. And the way it is lately, and I'm sure it's probably going to continue, is that the most important like aspect that the publishing company is going to look at, sadly, is how can they market your book, right? And unless you're lucky enough to get some really large New York City, Simon and Schuster type of publishing company, who will do like the publicity and that kind of things for you. For the most part, for the smaller presses, it's going to be up to you to like make those contacts, like get those like signings and book signings and book events, things like that. So more than likely that they will ask you actually in your query letter of how you're going to market your book, basically. And so that will be a big indicator, probably, of your success in getting it accepted. Is, do you have a good marketing plan? How do you have contacts? Do you have like, places that you'd be able to, already sell your book and that kind of thing. So, which is difficult because not, all writers and researchers are born promoters, and it's hard. It's hard to toot your own horn and be like, hey,
this is a recurring theme. This is absolutely a recurring theme.
But it's one of those realities in the industry. And so it really behooves, the writer, researcher to really do their homework and make sure that when they do choose a publisher, that it's, they do publish what you, and even look at some of the books that you like that are on that subject. I mean, those kind of presses, they may not want to publish something of the same subject, but if they're doing it that kind of the subject matter, in a broad kind of scope, then that might be a good place to, to send it to. But I think I sent it to about a half dozen, publishers. And then, and I got really lucky, and I have a couple, a lot of it is luck. I mean, it's funny, I got contacted so much from people afterwards thinking I had this like magic formula, like how to get published. But, I did my homework, and I think I think my book was, was good enough to be published. But a lot of it is just like, do you have what they need at that moment? Which you won't know, right? I mean, that's something that they do internally. But it just could be like it's a good timing for it. It's like, it's an anniversary coming up, or if it's something. I wrote an editorial for the Wall Street Journal on the WASP when they received their Congressional Gold Medal, and it was exciting. But it happened to be, it was the right time, right? It was like, oh, we gotta, this is happening, here in, so let's do that. So it's kind of one of those things that I got lucky, because it was like good timing, and maybe they had an extra space there
Yeah.
that I can fill. So, but yeah, so it is important to do your homework when you start contacting the publishing companies, but not to
Well,
give
that's
up.
great.
Don't give up hope. You know, it's like, it's just, it can happen. You know, it can absolutely happen. So you just gotta keep a good attitude and do your homework.